The airport buzzed with the ordinary chaos of boarding time. Travelers shuffled in lines, juggling passports and coffee cups, their voices blending into a low hum beneath the loudspeaker announcements. But in the middle of that crowd was someone who drew glances without even trying. Jordan Mitchell, the young son of one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. Dressed simply in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie, he looked like just another college student heading home for the holidays. Few people knew that his mother was Vanessa Mitchell, a black woman who had built an airline empire from the ground up, breaking barriers in an industry that had once shut its doors to her. Jordan moved with quiet confidence, though he rarely mentioned who his family was. He preferred life unannounced, unseen, and unjudged by money or fame. Today's flight was supposed to be uneventful, a cross-country trip for a business school seminar. But what Jordan didn't know was that this flight would change more than his schedule. It would reveal prejudice, test character, and shake an entire crew to its core. As passengers began filing onto the aircraft, a group of flight attendants prepared in the galley. Among them was Bridget Sanders, a senior attendant with 2 decades of service. She was strict, sharp, and known for never softening her tone. To Bridget, rules weren't just guidelines, they were weapons to maintain order. Over the years, her discipline had hardened into arrogance. She believed she could judge people at a glance, and today, Jordan would fall directly under her gaze. The cabin filled quickly. Jordan placed his carry-on neatly above his assigned first-class seat. He took out a book, an old, worn copy of his mother's favorite novel, and settled in quietly. But Bridget's eyes narrowed. To her, the hoodie, the casual shoes, and the skin tone didn't match. It was the polished stereotype she expected in first class. Without asking, without checking, she made up her mind. This young man didn't belong. She marched down the aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Excuse me," she said in a clipped tone. "This section is for first-class passengers only. Economy is further down the cabin." Jordan looked up, calm but confused. "This is my seat 2A, he replied softly, holding up his boarding pass. Bridget didn't even glance at it. Her voice rose, drawing unwanted attention. "Don't argue with me. People like you try to sneak into first class all the time. Take your things and move." The cabin grew quieter. Passengers pretended not to look, but their eyes betrayed curiosity. A man in a navy business suit smirked behind his newspaper. A woman fiddled with her phone, recording secretly. Jordan felt the sting of humiliation ripple through him, not because of where he sat, but because of the way he was being spoken to, the way prejudice disguised itself as procedure. He stood slowly, trying to keep his dignity. "Ma'am, please, this is my seat. Just scan my boarding pass, you'll see." But Bridget's authority wasn't about truth. It was about power. Her patience snapped. She slapped the boarding pass out of his hand, the sound echoing across the cabin. Gasps spread like wildfire. For a moment, time froze. The hum of conversation gone, the whispers silenced. A flight attendant had just slapped a passenger. Not just any passenger, but no one knew that yet. Jordan bent down, picked up the pass with trembling fingers, and sat back. His voice was low but steady, carrying more weight than a shout. "You've made a mistake." Bridget crossed her arms, her lips pressed thin. "No, I've done my job." But what she didn't know, what no one yet realized, was that her decision, her arrogance, and her slap would not only cost her dignity, but bring consequences she never imagined. Because Jordan wasn't just any young man. He was the heir to the very airline she worked for, and one phone call, just one, would turn this humiliation into a reckoning for the entire crew. The silence in the cabin pressed down like a heavy curtain after the slap. For a moment, no one breathed, no one spoke. Only the faint hum of the plane's ventilation filled the air. Jordan sat back down, his fingers closing gently over the boarding pass Bridget had knocked from his hand. His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed calm, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing him broken. Bridget, however, wasn't finished. She turned to the other attendants, her voice clipped and sharp. "Escort this young man to economy. He does not belong here." Her tone carried the authority of years in uniform, the certainty that her word was final. 2 younger attendants shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. Neither moved. They had seen the boarding pass, they had seen the truth, but fear of challenging their senior kept them frozen. Jordan rose slowly, not because he was obeying, but because he refused to let rage dictate his steps. "I will not cause a scene," he said quietly, "but you owe me an apology." His voice, though steady, carried a weight that made a few nearby passengers glance away in shame. They knew what they had witnessed, but silence was easier than courage. Bridget scoffed, her lips curling. "Apology? For what? For doing my job?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it sting. "Listen, young man, money can buy a ticket, but it can't buy class. You should learn your place before making demands you don't deserve." The words cut deeper than the slap. A woman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. A man in the back row lifted his phone higher, recording discreetly. Jordan inhaled slowly, holding back the storm inside him. He had grown up seeing his mother fight battles like this, enduring the quiet humiliations, the sideways glances, the subtle exclusions. But never had he expected to face it so publicly, so brazenly. "I don't need to prove myself to you," Jordan answered. His tone was not loud, but it carried through the cabin like a chord struck on a piano. "But when the truth comes out, remember this moment." Passengers murmured softly. Some avoided his gaze, ashamed of their silence. Others waited, curious to see what would unfold. One young attendant, a woman named Taylor, finally stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice was gentle. "Bridget, maybe we should check the manifest, just to be sure." Bridget shot her a glare sharp enough to cut. "I don't need to check anything. I know who belongs up here." Her words hung in the air, dripping with prejudice. Jordan slipped his phone from his pocket, his movements deliberate, his expression calm. He wasn't a boy scrambling to defend himself. He was a man who knew exactly what he carried in his hands, not just a phone, but a bridge to power, to truth, to justice. He scrolled, found the contact, and pressed call. The quiet, ringing tone seemed to echo louder than any voice in the cabin. Every eye shifted toward him, curiosity mixing with unease. Who was he calling? Why did he look so unshaken, so certain? Bridget crossed her arms, forcing a smirk to hide the flicker of doubt that pricked her chest. Jordan lifted the phone to his ear. His words were calm, almost casual, but they cut through the cabin like a blade. "Mom, it's me. I need you to know what just happened on your airline." Gasps rippled down the aisle. Passengers leaned forward whispering, phones trembling in their hands as they realized this wasn't just another passenger. This was someone important, someone powerful. And the flight attendant who had slapped him was about to learn just how costly her arrogance would become. Jordan's gaze never left Bridget's face. "Yes," he said into the phone, his voice steady, his eyes unflinching. "She slapped me, in front of everyone, because she decided I didn't belong." And in that moment, the entire crew felt the floor tilt beneath their feet. Not because the plane had moved, but because justice had just taken flight. The weight of Jordan's words over the phone hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Every passenger leaned into the silence, trying to hear, pretending not to, but unable to look away. Bridget's smirk faltered. Her arms, once crossed in defiance, now pressed tighter against her chest as though to shield her from the unraveling truth. "Yes, Mom," Jordan continued, his tone calm but steady, every syllable deliberate. "The senior flight attendant. She humiliated me in front of everyone. She said I didn't belong in first class, then she slapped me." He paused, letting the truth sink deeper into the shocked faces around him. "This is your airline, and this is what your employees think is acceptable." Gasps fluttered across the cabin. A businessman in the third row lowered his tablet, his face pale with realization. The woman who had been recording earlier clutched her phone tighter, her eyes wide as though she had stumbled into the opening scene of a courtroom drama. Bridget found her voice again, sharp but trembling. "Stop exaggerating, you can't just—" But Jordan held up a hand, silencing her without raising his voice. His eyes were calm, steady, too steady for someone powerless. That steadiness frightened her more than anger could. On the other end of the line, Vanessa Mitchell's voice, measured, powerful, unmistakable, filled the air just enough for those nearest to catch. "Stay calm, Jordan. Do not argue further. I will handle this. Passengers exchanged startled looks. Vanessa Mitchell, the CEO, the woman who had broken through every barrier to become the face of resilience in aviation. And now her son sat right there, quiet but unyielding, while the crew stood exposed. Within minutes, the chain of command began to tighten. The captain received a call through his secure headset, his face stiffening as he listened. He rose from the cockpit, stepping into the first-class cabin. The murmur of passengers dropped to silence at the sight of him. What is happening here? His voice carried authority, but it lacked certainty. He knew this was no ordinary disruption. Bridget straightened quickly, her tone defensive. Captain, this passenger caused a scene. He was in the wrong section. Jordan cut in, his words firm, his boarding pass raised high. Seat 2A, my ticket. Your attendant slapped me and tried to throw me out. The captain's eyes scanned the pass, then Jordan's calm expression. Slowly his gaze shifted to Bridget. He saw the tremor in her hands, the flush creeping up her neck, and in that silence, he knew the truth. I already have instructions from headquarters, the captain announced, his tone grave. We are not taking off until this matter is addressed. Shock rippled through the cabin. Passengers gasped. Some groaned, frustrated by the delay, while others whispered eagerly, aware they were watching a drama unfold that would be talked about long after landing. Bridget's face drained of color. Captain, you can't be serious. This is a misunderstanding. But the younger attendant, Taylor, finally stepped forward, her voice shaking but honest. No, Captain. It happened exactly as he said. I saw everything. We all did. The confession broke the last shield Bridget had. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time in her 20 years of service, she wasn't the authority in the cabin. She was the accused. Jordan ended his call, sliding the phone back into his pocket. He didn't need to say more. His silence spoke louder than Bridget's protests. His calm presence became a mirror, reflecting the arrogance and prejudice that had just been exposed. The captain cleared his throat. Headquarters has ordered that this crew remain in the ground for questioning. Security will meet us shortly. Murmurs swelled, disbelief turning into a storm. A woman whispered, Did you hear? The CEO's son. Another muttered. She slapped him in front of all of us. Bridget's knees weakened. Her authority, her years of pride, everything she had built, collapsed in that instant. The crew she once commanded avoided her eyes. The passengers she had once spoken to with icy superiority now looked at her as if she were a lesson, a warning. And Jordan, still seated in 2A, looked out the window. Not smug, not vengeful, just quiet, carrying himself with the dignity his mother had taught him. When they expect you to rage, remain calm, because calm is stronger than chaos. The engines of the plane quieted as ground security approached, and everyone knew this wasn't just a flight delay. This was judgment descending. The cabin was tense as footsteps echoed on the jet bridge. Moments later, 2 uniformed airport security officers stepped inside. Their presence shifted the air instantly. What had begun as a humiliation now carried the weight of an official investigation. Passengers craned their necks to watch, some holding phones higher to capture what would undoubtedly go viral within hours. The captain moved aside, his posture rigid. These are the officers from ground security, he announced. They've been instructed by headquarters to speak with the crew immediately. Bridget's heart pounded in her chest. For years, she had controlled situations with her voice, her posture, her unwavering certainty. But now her certainty cracked. She forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. Officers, this is all a misunderstanding. I was enforcing the rules. That young man... She pointed at Jordan, her voice tightening. He tried to sit in a seat he didn't belong to. One of the officers raised his hand, cutting her off. His tone was calm but firm. We've already received a call directly from Ms. Vanessa Mitchell. This is no longer about your version versus his. We're here to verify what happened and detain the involved crew for questioning. A ripple of gasps moved through the cabin. The passengers weren't just witnesses anymore. They were part of the record. Silence pressed down, heavy and expectant. Taylor, the younger attendant, swallowed hard. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "Officers, it happened." He showed his boarding pass. He was seated correctly. Bridget didn't check, she assumed, and when he protested, she slapped the pass out of his hand. Everyone saw it. The officers turned their gaze on Bridget. Her face burned as every pair of eyes fixed on her, some with quiet accusation, others with open disgust. She stammered, He was being disrespectful, Jordan rose slowly from his seat, not with anger, but with quiet dignity. "No," he interrupted softly, yet the weight of his voice silenced the entire cabin. "I was calm. I showed my pass. She decided I didn't belong. That's the truth." The officer nodded once. "Thank you. That's consistent with what we've already heard." He turned back to Bridget. "Ma'am, you and the crew involved will need to disembark with us for questioning. You may speak to investigators afterward." For the first time in her career, Bridget's authority evaporated. The passengers she had once towered over now looked down at her with disdain. Her hand shook as she fumbled with her badge, her voice breaking. "You can't do this. I've worked 20 years. But another passenger stood, an older woman with silver hair in 3D. She raised her voice clearly for the entire cabin. "No one cares how many years you worked if you treat people without respect. I watched you. We all watched you. And you didn't just humiliate him. You humiliated yourself." A murmur of agreement spread. The man in the navy suit added, his tone heavy with guilt. "I stayed silent when it happened, but it was wrong. Everything about it was wrong." Bree. Bridget froze, her lips trembling as truth surrounded her from all sides. She had no shield left. The silence she had once relied upon for control was gone. In its place was a chorus of voices finally speaking. The officers stepped forward, gesturing firmly. "Please collect your things. You're leaving this aircraft now." Her legs wobbled as she moved, clutching her bag like a lifeline. The other attendants followed, shame etched on their faces. Even those who hadn't spoken against Jordan now carried the weight of complicity. As the crew filed out under the gaze of passengers and cameras, the silence that followed was different from before. No longer heavy with fear, it was heavy with reckoning. Jordan sat back down in 2A, his book still waiting where he had left it. The pages hadn't turned, but something deeper had. Passengers glanced his way, not with suspicion or judgment now, but with respect. And as the officers escorted the crew away, one thought pulsed through the cabin like a quiet drumbeat. Justice had boarded this flight, and arrogance had just been escorted off. The cabin remained hushed after the crew's removal, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of tension, shame, and reflection. People shifted in their seats, unsure where to place their eyes. The hum of the aircraft system seemed louder than before, filling the gaps where the crew's voices once commanded. Jordan sat quietly in 2A, his hands folded over the old book he carried. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. His stillness made the moment heavier. It was the kind of quiet that spoke louder than anger, reminding everyone of what they had just witnessed, and how most had done nothing. The captain returned, his face grave. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will resume boarding shortly with a replacement crew. Headquarters has instructed me to inform you that this incident is being handled at the highest level. The actions taken against this passenger were unacceptable and will not be ignored." A murmur moved through the rows. For the first time, passengers allowed themselves to voice what they had felt when the slap landed. A man in 3C leaned forward, his voice heavy with guilt. "I saw it happen, but I didn't say a word. I thought it wasn't my place, but silence made me part of it." His words cracked the surface. The woman across the aisle, still clutching her phone, spoke next. "I recorded it. I thought maybe sharing it later would be enough, but recording without speaking isn't courage. It's hiding." Her eyes dropped, ashamed. Taylor, the young attendant who had finally stepped up, lingered near the galley. Her eyes shimmered with conflict. She swallowed hard before speaking. "I should have spoken sooner. I was afraid of Bridget, of losing my job. But watching him sit there, calm, after being humiliated, it showed me fear is no excuse. Respect isn't optional." Her words touched something deep, An older gentleman in business attire nodded slowly. He carried himself better than any of us did. We should have stood with him from the start. Jordan finally looked up. His gaze moved across the faces now turned toward him, not in suspicion, but in acknowledgement. It's easy to stay quiet when someone else is being humiliated, he said softly. But silence gives power to the wrong people. I didn't need anyone to fight for me. But the truth is, sometimes the person being targeted can't carry it alone. That's when voices matter most. The cabin sank into thoughtful quiet. His words weren't scolding, but they cut deeper than anger could. Passengers shifted, some bowing their heads, others nodding slowly. The silence changed, from avoidance to acceptance, from complicity to conscience. Minutes later, a new crew boarded, their faces professional but their eyes flickering with unease. They knew what had happened. They had heard. One of them, a young man with a crisp uniform and steady voice, approached Jordan. He bent slightly, his tone respectful. On behalf of those of us who work here with integrity, I want to apologize for what you endured. It does not represent all of us. Jordan gave a slight nod. Thank you. I accept that. The captain addressed the passengers again. This flight will depart soon, but before we continue, let it be clear. Discrimination of any kind will never be tolerated here. What happened today is already being investigated at the top. Passengers exchanged glances, realizing the weight of his words. At that moment, many of them understood they hadn't just witnessed an embarrassing scene. They had witnessed a turning point, a lesson written in real time. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Jordan leaned against the window, the book resting on his lap. He wasn't thinking of revenge. He wasn't thinking of power. He was thinking of the lesson his mother had always told him. When respect is denied, stay calm. Truth has its own way of speaking louder than hate. And today, that truth had spoken in front of them all. The engines finally roared to life, but the cabin still carried the weight of what had happened. Every passenger seemed to sit a little straighter, as if they were no longer just travelers on a routine flight but witnesses to something bigger. Jordan remained in 2A, his posture calm, his book open though he hadn't turned a page in a while. He didn't need to read, the story was unfolding around him. Midway through the flight, the captain made another announcement. His voice was steady, but there was a gravity to it that silenced every whisper. Ladies and gentlemen, headquarters has requested that I update you. The flight crew involved earlier has been officially suspended pending a full investigation. They will not be returning to duty until this matter is resolved. A ripple of gasps, then murmurs of approval moved through the cabin. Justice was no longer just a possibility. It was already in motion. The passengers, who had sat frozen in silence before, now exchanged looks of quiet relief. Some even glanced toward Jordan, their expressions carrying a mix of apology and respect. The older woman with silver hair leaned across the aisle toward him, her voice carried, steady and clear. You handled this with more dignity than any of us did. You didn't shout, you didn't fight. You let the truth reveal itself. That's real strength. Jordan gave her a small nod. My mother always says, when you stay calm, people see the truth more clearly. Anger clouds it. Dignity sharpens it. The woman smiled softly, and several nearby passengers nodded, their faces thoughtful. For the first time, it felt as if the entire cabin shared the same lesson, carried on the same current. Taylor, the young attendant who had spoken up, approached Jordan with careful steps. She lowered herself slightly so her voice wouldn't carry too far. I want to thank you, not just for what you said, but for the way you carried yourself. You made me realize I have to be braver. Silence is easy, integrity isn't. Jordan studied her for a moment, then replied gently, It's never too late to do the right thing. You spoke when it mattered most. Her eyes glistened and she nodded quickly, retreating with a quiet determination in her step. The rest of the flight passed in thoughtful silence. No one complained about delays. No one muttered about inconvenience. It was as though the passengers had all been part of a trial, and now they were left with the verdict written on their own consciences. When the plane landed, the presence of security officers waiting at the gate reminded everyone that the matter was far from over. News cameras had already gathered. The story had leaked. Someone's video had already reached social media. By the time Jordan stepped off the aircraft, his mother's name was trending. At the arrival gate, Vanessa Mitchell herself stood waiting. Dressed in a simple dark suit, her presence alone carried authority that could silence a room. She embraced her son, and the crowd watching fell even quieter. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You didn't just defend yourself, you showed them what real strength looks like." Jordan nodded, emotion tight in his throat. "I only did what you taught me." She turned then, addressing the cameras, the officers, and the passengers who had lingered to watch. "Respect is not optional, not in my company, not in my planes. Today my son was disrespected, but let me be clear, this isn't about him being my son. This is about every passenger who has ever been treated as less than because someone decided they didn't belong. That ends here." Applause broke out, soft at first, then stronger, swelling into something undeniable. Passengers clapped not only for her words but for the justice they had all become part of. Jordan walked beside his mother, quiet, his head held high. He hadn't asked for attention, but the lesson had been carved into the moment. Power doesn't come from shouting or from proving worth to those who refuse to see it. Power comes from dignity, from truth, from the courage to stand without lowering yourself to the level of those who try to break you. And as the crowd dispersed, the story lingered in every heart that had witnessed it. For the rest of their lives, they would remember the flight where silence turned to courage, arrogance turned to shame, and dignity turned into justice. Because in the end, the message was clear. Never judge a person by appearance, and never mistake calmness for weakness. Respect belongs to everyone, or consequences will follow.